Welcome to JV's Total Gaming, and today I have an interesting question for you. Is VR dead on arrival? Now, I want to point out I'm talking specifically about virtual reality gaming here. There are other uses for virtual reality, and I mean, not to be lewd or silly, but honestly, pornography is probably going to sell more units than anything else because that's the way the industry works. But we're talking specifically about virtual reality gaming. And when we heard about what was coming out, when we heard about people trying out the systems, we had reactions a lot like this guy on the Oculus Rift page, where people were talking about how this was truly going to be the next step in gaming. And a lot of people really seemed to believe that. And then there were the naysayers who were saying that this is basically going to be like 3D televisions, where everyone said this is going to be the big thing. Some early adopters would go out and get it, and it would die off. Well, two of the three major systems that are coming out, at least in the first run, if you will, of attempts at virtual reality, have come out, and interest already seems to be waning quite a bit. So we're looking right now at the Oculus Rift. There's also the HTC Vive that has come out to a little bit more fanfare than the Rift, and then Sony's PlayStation VR, which is coming out shortly. So the big differences between these systems is the first to market was the Oculus. The HTC Vive has with it handheld controllers and sensors so that you are able to play full room experiences. This is going to be available on the Rift, but there are going to be peripherals you'll have to buy separately. And to be fair, the HTC Vive costs quite a bit more because it comes with those peripherals. While they both offer seated experiences, the Vive is the one that is already prepared basically to have you be able to move around your space. But we'll get into some potential issues with that, and we'll take a look at the Vive here in a moment, and the PS VR that's coming out. But where we stand is that while the pre-order units sold like hotcakes, there are only so many of those units, and the games haven't necessarily been spectacular, and the interest has seemed to died off a little bit now that these systems are available for the market in order to purchase. So does that mean that VR is dead almost as quickly as it started? A little bit like 3D televisions. HTC Vive, you can see the controllers you hold in your hands and then the motion sensors you have to place up in your room, which is a potential problem, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But you can see the Vive is meant to be able to track the movement of your body based on the movement of your head and the movement of your arms based on those controllers. And to be fair, users have reported overall really good one-to-one sort of controls. It's not necessarily the system that isn't working, it's just that maybe the games aren't there for it is a big part of the problem. But we're going to get into that a little bit more. So one of the major issues why maybe it seems right now like virtual reality may be already dying in gaming before it really got started is a small install base. The pre-order units of these sold like hotcakes, but they were only able to produce so many of them, and even though the units seem to be selling as they're coming out, there's very few users using them. So here's the problem. If you're a game developer and you want to make a fairly expensive game, how are you going to make that a money-making proposition? If there's only so many people that can buy games, you would have to sell to an incredibly large amount of the install base, or it might even be impossible to make a profit even if you got the majority of owners in order to buy your game. So because of that, there's also no system selling games. That most of the things seem to be more like tech demos because companies can't invest that much money into it. There's also issues of exclusivity. So these aren't technically different systems the way a Sony PlayStation or a Microsoft Xbox are. They are peripherals in a way, and you do buy games for them, but they're not really their own systems because you can use these on a computer that you own. So the question of whether or not these companies should be making exclusive games has come up, because one of the possible solutions for there being a small install base, for example, Facebook has put a lot of money into Oculus Rift. It was originally a Kickstarter project, and then Facebook basically bought it, and they've been giving companies money in order to make games. Because they've done that, they felt like they had the right to make those games exclusive, and a lot of people feel like they don't, and there's been a lot of controversy around that. So big backers who want to get this going have been able to invest some money, but at the same time, if the games aren't economically viable, that's only going to last so long. Another possible solution to the small install base may be the Sony VR, which we'll take a look at in a second, which is going to be the cheapest way to get into virtual reality, especially if you already own a PlayStation 4. So here we're looking at Sony's solution, and it still isn't cheap. Trust me, but if you already own a PlayStation 4, it is definitely the most affordable way to get into it. And while it is considered the lowest of the quality systems, it really, at least from what people have played so far, and you have to be careful because it hasn't actually hit the market yet, people have said it's really not that far behind the Oculus as far as quality. So how well it's going to work, though, is an issue. You can use these PlayStation controllers that were PlayStation Move controllers that you might have had from the PlayStation 3 era still. You do have to get a specific camera in order to make them work, but there are issues with these. They're meant to work like the Vive's already existing controllers and the ones that are coming out for Oculus, but because they work on this light system, they don't track as well. If they go behind your body and the camera can't see the light, they stop tracking, and I just don't expect them to work as well as the controllers designed for these systems, and not to feel as well as the Vive controllers that people have said have felt really well. But it is a somewhat more affordable solution, so maybe that will help the install base quite a bit. But again, you're going to have issues with exclusivity. Is everything on the PlayStation going to be available for other systems? Probably not, particularly because the PlayStation is its own system and has a little bit more legs to stand on as far as having exclusive things, while the Oculus has backed off a little bit. And while there were all these controversies and people making software to hack and back and forth, basically at this point it seems like they're trying less to do the exclusive thing and allowing people on a Vive to be able to play Oculus games. Alright, now here in the background I'm showing off a little bit of VR gameplay from the Unit Lost channel that has now basically become a Overwatch channel, but it shows off a little bit of the Vive mechanisms, and we'll talk about one other issue that VR is definitely having. So there is the small install base, which makes making expensive games a real issue, and then there are also technical issues. You don't see it so much in the videos, but there is what's called a screen door effect a lot of people report when they're playing it. Basically, by having to render all of this stuff in 3D all of the time, when you look around, sometimes it looks not quite pixelated in the way we think of it in older style graphics, but as if you're looking through a screen door, as if the individual pixels are almost separated by a very thin wire mesh, if you will, which can be a real issue for some people. There's also the issue of text being blurry. Much like you can sometimes find displaying certain things on certain televisions, it's difficult to display text in a clear way in virtual reality. So while these motion controllers, and actually the reason I want to show off this video is we can see the motion controllers functioning in the one-to-one way, and there's another thing I'm going to talk about in just a moment, actually two things that relate to this video and the way the character is moving around in the space. But the text issue can be a thing for some people. We just don't have the processing power to render everything in the way we'd want to without the screen door effect or without those text issues. But two other major issues, especially with the room scale environments, are well, and one of them is the space in order to move around your room. So you'll notice in this game there is a teleport mechanism. You can look around in the area you're in, but if you want to move, you say where you want to move to and your character instantly teleports there. Well, that serves two functions. One, it keeps you from walking into your walls, and there are ways to try to protect you. Basically, you scan your room the first time you use the Vive. It gives you almost like a laser grid showing you, hey, you're getting close to a wall on the screen if you're getting close to a wall. That doesn't prevent you from tripping over a wire or, a chair leg or something in your environment. There are safety mechanisms in place, but people having the space in order to effectively play this game and also being able to clear out a room in order to make it safe while still having your computer in those cords, that's a real issue in these room scale environments. And then an issue, whether you're playing room scale or if you're in a seated experience, is motion sickness. Now, people suffer this to varying degrees. Some people can hardly use the system at all without feeling sick, and others can tolerate it pretty well. But the issue is when you are moving around on the screen as your character, but your body isn't moving. If you are seated in something like a race car game or you're the pilot of a spaceship, the issues aren't really there because technically you're in a seated position and your mind can deal with it. But if you're a character moving around a world and you're in first person and your character character moves but your body doesn't, that is really where people tend to get sick. The brain really does think that it's in this environment. People have been put in situations where they're kind of standing on the edge of a building or something and asked to take a step forward. They know very well they're in the room they were in just moments ago and there's a floor there, but they're unable to do it because their mind believes that they're there, even though they rationally know that they're not. And the mind thinks that your body's moving when it's not, which can throw you off. That's the other reason this character is moving around by teleporting. So your mind's okay with you teleporting, so maybe that's a signification that we'll eventually have that technology and it's theoretically possible, because your mind's totally cool with that. But it's not cool with the character on screen moving while you're not. Now, some games are kind of drawn back where you're not the person in the action. It's more of like a top-down effect where the camera's pulled away, and it's kind of odd. You would expect virtual reality to always be in first person, but some of those games have actually functioned well. The mind's okay with that. It doesn't think you're that character when the camera's pulled away. And third person has had some varying degrees of success where it's kind of behind the shoulder or something like that. But definitely when you're in first person, your character moving while you're not is a real big issue. So between the small install base, between the technical issues like screen door and text, motion sickness and room scale issues, it looks like VR has a lot of problems. But does that mean VR is dead? Well, the big thing that I think is going to make or break virtual reality gaming is the games. And I mentioned before, there aren't really system-selling games. A lot of the games simply look like tech demos or shovelware, which is an industry term for games just being put out there hoping that people will buy with very small production budgets and often high prices, because these companies have to charge high prices because they know they're only going to sell so many copies of the game. So with all of these things going on, it seems like, well, VR might be in trouble with these short, limited experiences that only hold people's attention for so long. And also, a lot of people can only play virtual reality games for so long. So with a lack of full-fledged killer apps and the whole exclusivity issues and all these things, is VR dead? And I would like to argue that maybe it's not, because we don't even have all the systems out yet, and we have to remember this is the first iteration of these systems. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but this is a brand new design space. And people are still, trying to figure out how this is going to work. Some people just try to do tech demos, some people try to do interpretations of already existing games, and a lot of these things haven't necessarily worked all that well. But with this whole new space, people are going to be able to come up with entirely new ideas, like when we were able to move into 3 dimensions. And looking back in some of those early 3D games, some of them, like the Mario games or Zelda, are really good, but a lot of them are kind of garbage by today's standards because we didn't really know how to use that space. And virtual reality programmers will get better at that as it goes, and I think a big question as to whether or not virtual reality gaming is D.O.A. is, are investors going to stick with it long enough? I do believe this could be a truly transformative medium. Everyone who has tried it, for the most part, with few exceptions, has said this is way more transformative than 3-dimensional movies or things like that. Your mind really does think that you're there, and that is a powerful thing. So as we get more powerful technologies, people programming better, then I really do think this still could be something that transforms the industry eventually, but I do think it's going to take some time. So what is going to make the difference? And I really think it's whether or not investors are willing to stick with it. I'm going to give you a story of 2 television shows, Cheers and Firefly. One of those shows, both of those shows didn't start off very well. There wasn't enough people watching it, and they were considering canceling the shows. In one example, the industry decided to stick with it, and Cheers ended up becoming a very, very successful, very, very long-running show, and even had to spin off of Frasier eventually. And, well, as fellow nerds, let's just not talk about Firefly because it's very sad, but most people believe that show would have eventually been successful had it been given a better opportunity and had they actually aired the pilot first, and there were all kinds of major issues that led to that show only running half a season. And I think it's going to be the same thing for virtual reality. I think if companies like Facebook, who has, incredible amounts of money, are willing to stick with it, if designers are able to get the backing in order to keep experimenting, and if we eventually have other iterations of these systems that both are more powerful and more accessible, maybe don't have as many demands as to all the things you have to plug into your PC, that we just learn how to make these systems a little bit better in years to come, I do think virtual reality can become a staple of gaming the way we think of console and PC gaming. But the big question is, will companies stick with it? And if they don't, yeah, I think it'll probably die for quite a few years until eventually somebody tries it again. And if they try it again, will it end up like Rock Band when they tried it again recently, or Guitar Hero? Maybe, maybe not. But the real question is are people going to stick with it? And I genuinely believe this offers something we've never had before. This offers so much more than just 3D movies, and pretty much everyone who has played it feels that way. It's just a question of time and investment. So is VR DOA? I don't think it is yet, but it's close. But it's going to depend on the money of people who are backing these things, and the ingenuity of the programmers, and the ingenuity of the engineers coming up with new systems, so that maybe later iterations of virtual reality will be able to become popular enough and affordable enough for people to really enjoy. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if I was right. But hopefully those of you, especially those of you who maybe haven't really been following virtual reality gaming up to this point, enjoyed this video and found it informative. If you did, go ahead and leave a like. If you didn't, go ahead and leave a dislike. Always appreciate any new subscribers, and we'll be back with more board and video game content. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.